The room expected a fight. The other man stepped forward. He made it clear he wanted to test Bruce Lee. Everyone waited for Bruce Lee to respond. He didn't. The training hall wasn't large. Wooden floors, white walls marked with scuffs from years of drills. A few students stood along the edges, arms folded, pretending not to stare too directly. The challenger had already taken off his jacket, rolled his shoulders once. He stood half a step too close, not close enough to strike, close enough to claim space. His chin was slightly lifted, not aggressive yet, but ready. He said something short, not loud, just enough for the room to hear. An invitation disguised as a demand. A few people shifted their weight. Someone exhaled sharply. The air tightened the way it does before contact. Bruce Lee stood in front of him, relaxed. Hands low, fingers loose, breathing steady. No visible tension in his shoulders. The challenger bounced lightly on his feet, testing rhythm, testing distance, testing ego. Everyone waited for Bruce Lee to lift his hands. He didn't. The silence stretched a little longer than it should have. It wasn't empty. It was loaded. The kind of silence where people begin scanning for cues. Who moves first? Who blinks? Who changes posture? The challenger adjusted his stance again. Small correction. He expected engagement by now. Even a slight shift forward. A tightening of the jaw. A change in breathing. There was none. Bruce Lee's posture didn't change. His shoulders remained level. His gaze steady but not fixed in a threatening way. He wasn't staring him down. He wasn't looking away either. He was simply there. The challenger rolled his neck once, a casual movement that wasn't entirely casual. His hands rose slightly, then dropped again. He let them hover near his chest, as if waiting for the signal to begin. It didn't come. One of the students near the wall shifted his feet, the rubber sole brushing softly against wood. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. The challenger took another half step forward, testing proximity again. He was close enough now that their breathing shared the same space. Still, Bruce Lee didn't respond. No stance. No guard. No tightening. The challenger's confidence had been built on anticipation. He expected reaction, resistance, something to push against. Instead, there was stillness. He gave a small, almost dismissive smile, the kind meant to provoke, to signal that he wasn't impressed. But it lingered too long. His eyes searched Bruce Lee's face for a crack. For irritation, for pride, for ego. Nothing. Bruce Lee's breathing remained slow, controlled, almost indifferent to the performance happening inches away. The challenger shifted his weight to his back foot, then forward again. A subtle bounce. He looked briefly to the side, making sure people were watching. They were. That mattered. This wasn't just about skill, it was about position, status in a room. He cleared his throat, said something else, slightly louder this time, a comment framed as a question. It didn't land. The words seemed to fall between them, unanswered. A faint crease formed at the corner of his mouth. Not anger yet, just confusion beginning to press in. He expected escalation. He had rehearsed escalation. But Bruce Lee wasn't giving him the script. A bead of sweat rolled slowly down the challenger's temple, not from exertion, from tension that had nowhere to release. The air felt heavier now. The students were no longer pretending not to stare. They were openly watching, waiting for the moment that normally comes next. The moment never came. Bruce Lee remained exactly where he was, balanced, present, unmoved. And the longer he stayed that way, the more the challenger had to hold the entire moment by himself. The challenger smirked. It wasn't wide, just enough to suggest he believed the silence meant hesitation. He stepped forward again. "You don't want to?" he asked, louder now. The words carried. They were no longer private. They were for the room. Still nothing. Bruce Lee's eyes remained steady, not locked in hostility, not drifting away, just aware, present. He shifted one foot back slightly. The movement was clean, efficient, not defensive, just a quiet adjustment of balance. It was subtle, but the room noticed. This wasn't fear. Fear moves quickly. Fear tightens the shoulders. Fear narrows the breath. There was none of that. It was refusal. The challenger's smile tightened at the edges. His jaw set slightly. He raised his hands into a light stance now. Elbows loose, guard casual. He moved side to side, testing angles. He expected Bruce Lee to mirror him. He didn't. Bruce Lee's hands stayed low, fingers relaxed, breathing even. The challenger gave a quick feint toward the shoulder, fast enough to demand a reaction. No flinch, no blink, no tightening of the neck. The feint dissolved in the air like it had never been thrown. A few people near the wall exchanged glances. The challenger shifted again, this time circling slightly to the left. He wanted movement. He wanted the dance to begin, but he was the only one dancing. His steps grew a little sharper. Not wild, just more deliberate. He flicked his lead hand forward again, not to strike, just to test space. Nothing. Bruce Lee didn't raise a guard, didn't parry, didn't counter. He simply watched. That was the part that unsettled him. Being watched without engagement. The challenger's breathing began to change. Slightly faster now, not from effort, but from something internal. A small pressure building. He laughed once, short, forced. "Come on," he said, trying to keep the tone light. The room didn't respond. The laughter that might have followed never arrived. He stepped in closer, reducing the gap again. Their shoulders nearly aligned, close enough that the tension should have sparked. Bruce Lee remained upright, neutral. The challenger's hands were still raised, but they hovered awkwardly now. Too high for a conversation, too low for a fight. He dropped them slightly, then raised them again, indecision creeping in. He expected escalation by now. He had prepared for contact. What he hadn't prepared for was stillness that refused to validate him. He tried another small feint. A twitch of the shoulder, a quick step in and out. Bruce Lee didn't follow. The challenger glanced briefly at the watching students. He needed acknowledgement. Confirmation that this moment belonged to him. But the eyes on him were no longer admiring. They were observing. The difference was subtle. But he felt it. He spoke again, a little louder. "You're not going to." This time, the question carried something else. Not confidence. Uncertainty. Bruce Lee's face didn't change. No smirk, no irritation, no challenge. Just calm. The challenger's movements began to look less controlled. His pacing slightly uneven. He shifted his weight too quickly, then corrected it. The silence wasn't working for him anymore. It was working against him. Every second Bruce Lee refused to move. The challenger had to fill the space. And the more he tried to fill it, the more exposed he became. The air felt different now. The expectation of impact had shifted into something else. Discomfort. And it was no longer centered on Bruce Lee. He circled again, slower this time. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't know what else to do. The initial confidence had rhythm. This movement didn't. It looked measured, but it felt uncertain. His feet slid across the floor with just a little too much sound. Bruce Lee stayed where he was, balanced, neutral, not squared up, not angled away, just present. The challenger stopped circling. "You afraid?" he said. The word hung in the air longer than expected. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't barked, it was placed carefully, like something meant to trigger a reaction. It didn't. Bruce Lee's breathing remained steady. His chest rose and fell at the same pace it had since the beginning. His shoulders were relaxed. His eyes didn't narrow. They didn't widen. They simply stayed. The challenger stepped closer again, this time closing the distance deliberately. Their space narrowed to inches. He expected instinct to take over. Most men react when someone enters their range. The body adjusts, the stance tightens, the ego rises. None of that happened. Bruce Lee didn't shift into a guard, didn't turn his body sideways, didn't plant his feet for defense. He just stood there. The challenger felt it. For the first time, he hesitated before speaking again. "You don't want to prove something?" he asked. There was a crack in the tone now. Small, barely noticeable, but present. He was no longer asking for a fight. He was asking for validation. Bruce Lee didn't give it. The silence had weight now. Not passive, active. It pressed against the challenger's posture, against his breath, against the certainty he walked in with. He raised his hands again, but they came up slower this time. Less conviction. He feinted toward Bruce Lee's chest. Quick, sharp, testing, still nothing. The feint ended in empty air. He let his hand hover for a second, too long before pulling it back. That second mattered. The room felt it. A few students leaned forward slightly, not out of excitement, but curiosity. Something was changing. The challenger shifted his feet again, but his stance no longer looked confident. It looked performative, like he was continuing a script that wasn't being followed. He tried to laugh again. It came out thinner. He reached forward and tapped Bruce Lee lightly on the forearm. Not a strike, not a shove. Just contact, an attempt to provoke. Bruce Lee didn't react. He didn't pull back. He didn't tense. He didn't even look down at the point of contact. The challenger withdrew his hand quickly, as if the lack of response had burned him. The contact had done nothing, and that was the problem. He had expected escalation, a push, a correction, a counter. Instead, he was left alone in his aggression. His shoulders began to rise slightly with each breath. His jaw tightened. His lips pressed together. The room was no longer waiting for a fight. They were watching a man try to force one, and the longer Bruce Lee remained unmoved, the more the imbalance grew. The challenger wasn't dominating the space anymore. He was filling it. Too much. He shifted back half a step, then forward again, unsure of which direction made him look stronger. His eyes flicked toward the observers, searching for reassurance. He didn't find it. Bruce Lee remained still, calm, unclaimed by the tension, and that calm was starting to feel heavier than any raised fist. The challenger stopped moving. For the first time since stepping forward, he stood still. Not calm, paused. His hands were still raised, but the shape of his stance had changed. It no longer looked ready. It looked suspended, as if he was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Bruce Lee hadn't shifted. The space between them felt narrower now, even though neither had moved. "Say something," the challenger muttered. It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but the tone was different. Earlier, he had tried to pull Bruce Lee into the moment. Now he was trying to pull him into a reaction. Bruce Lee gave him neither. No note, no shake of the head, no irritation, just steady breathing. The silence began to press in. A few people along the wall adjusted their arms, uncrossing and crossing again. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted their weight from one foot to the other. The energy had changed. It was no longer anticipation. It was exposure. The challenger's jaw worked slightly, as if he was chewing through words he couldn't quite form. He glanced over his shoulder briefly, not fully turning, just checking. The room wasn't backing him. They weren't laughing. They weren't encouraging. They were watching, and watching quietly. He stepped in again, but this time the step lacked rhythm. It was abrupt, a little too fast. His shoulder brushed lightly against Bruce Lee's chest. Still nothing. Bruce Lee absorbed the contact without resistance. Not stiff, not yielding, just there. The challenger's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for irritation, searching for the smallest sign that he had finally pushed far enough. There wasn't one. His breathing became audible now, slightly heavier. He dropped his hands for a second, just a second, then raised them again, as if remembering he was supposed to look ready. But the posture no longer matched the intention. He wasn't asking for a fight anymore. He was trying to salvage position. "Are you going to do anything?" he said louder now. The words carried to the corners of the hall. And in that volume, something slipped. It didn't sound dominant. It sounded impatient. Bruce Lee's expression remained unchanged. No tightening around the eyes. No tension in the mouth. His stillness was not passive. It was deliberate. The challenger took a half step back without meaning to. It was almost imperceptible, but he felt it. The shift. He had been the one advancing. Now his body had retreated on its own. He corrected it quickly, stepping forward again to erase the movement. But the correction made it obvious. The students saw it. The imbalance was no longer subtle. The man who demanded confrontation was adjusting himself more than the man who refused it. The challenger's voice dropped slightly when he spoke next. "Fine," he said, but it didn't sound like a conclusion. It sounded like uncertainty trying to disguise itself. The tension in the room no longer revolved around whether a fight would start. It revolved around whether the challenger understood what was happening. He had stepped into the center, expecting collision. Instead, he had stepped into stillness. And stillness wasn't something he could overpower. The challenger's shoulders dropped slightly, not in surrender, in fatigue. The kind that comes when effort produces nothing. He looked at Bruce Lee again, but this time the look was different. It wasn't challenging. It wasn't searching for weakness. It was searching for confirmation. Confirmation that this moment could still become what he intended. Bruce Lee gave him none. His posture hadn't changed since the beginning. Balanced, breathing steady, eyes calm. The challenger swallowed. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt amplified. He stepped back half a step. He didn't mean to make it obvious, but he did. And once it happened, he couldn't undo it. He shifted his weight again, trying to recenter himself, trying to recover the space he had just given up. But the air had already changed. The students along the wall weren't tense anymore. They weren't waiting. They were observing. The challenger cleared his throat. "Guess you're not interested," he said. The words were framed casually, but the tone had lost its edge. There was no smirk now, no bounce in his stance. His hands lowered fully to his sides. That was the real shift. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet lowering of guard. Bruce Lee didn't nod, didn't respond. He simply remained where he was, as if the entire exchange had required nothing from him. The challenger glanced around the room one more time. He didn't find approval. He didn't find laughter. He found something worse. Neutrality. He realized then that the confrontation he wanted would have given him clarity. Win or lose, it would have been action. Something measurable. Instead, he had been left alone with his own insistence. He had pushed. He had spoken. He had moved. And none of it had moved the man in front of him. That realization landed slowly. You could see it in the way his jaw loosened, in the way his shoulders relaxed without pride. He stepped fully back now, creating clear distance between them. Not dramatically, just enough to signal the end. No apology, no announcement. He adjusted his shirt, picked up his jacket from the floor, and turned slightly toward the wall. Not fleeing, just exiting the center. The room didn't react loudly. There was no applause, no commentary, just a quiet understanding that something had happened. Bruce Lee shifted his weight once, resetting his stance to neutral as if preparing for the next drill. He hadn't raised a hand, hadn't tightened a fist, hadn't changed expression. He didn't need to win. The other man had already revealed what he came for. And in the silence he couldn't control, he had already lost it.